Welcome to the channel for the future caretakers of resurrected species. Welcome to the Paleo-Zoo-Keepers Association.
Oh, hello there. Welcome to the Paleo-Zoo-Keeper Association. My name is Austin. Now, when it comes to rewilding creatures, we often do that to be able to help reestablish ancient old ecological connections so that we could be able to make the ecosystem better, healthier, basically. And one of them would be the reintroduction of apex predators in certain areas. Now, throughout history, we definitely have dealt with many certain forms of reintroductions of predators in certain areas. The wolves in Yellowstone National Park is a good example. And I even mentioned the rewilding of more ancient predators like Leo, for example. But there is one creature, while rewilding predator, that would definitely be a unique take. And I am talking about probably the world-famous the Haast Eagle. The Haast Eagle was known as Hoppocornis morai, which means grappling hook bird of morai, in 1872 when the fossils were found. It's been reclassed as Paratus morai due to genetic research that was done recently in 2021, although we'll get to that later. This bird was native to the South Island of New Zealand. With a wingspan of 3 meters long, basically 3 feet long, weighing between 20 and 40 pounds, and stands at a height of 2 feet and 11 inches tall when standing, it is one of, if not the largest species of eagle in the world. Also, on a side note, like living eagles, the females are larger than the males, and the males would weigh between 20 and 26 pounds, whereas the females will weigh between 20 and 40 pounds. So this will definitely be an important detail later in the video. For the longest time, it was thought to be closely related to the Australian wedge-tailed eagle, golden eagles of Asia, or even a type of sea eagle, all of which are known to be pretty large themselves. But recent genetic research has shown that the Haast eagle is actually more closely related to the little eagle of Australia, a small eagle that's around the same size as a peregrine falcon. With this genetic research, the Haast eagle's scientific name has been changed to Paratus morai, with the genus name of the little eagle. Now, you would think that this animal has died from a very distant past, whether it's like thousands or millions of years ago. But in actual fact, the Haast eagle died out quite recently, centuries ago. Say like in the 1400s, or at least like between 1440 to 1445 to be more precise. So these guys died out pretty recently and were pretty much died off around the time when Michelangelo was starting on his statue of David. So definitely not what we always expect in this sort of scenario. Its extinction is linked to its chief prey, the moa. The moa is a family of flightless birds that resemble emus, but have taken ecological roles of multiple herbivorous ungulates, from deer to elephants, and the 9 species range from turkey size to the largest being 12 feet tall and weighing in at over 500 pounds. The Haast eagle is immensely specialized for hunting medium to large-sized animals. With its tiger claw-sized talons, its 530 psi grip, which could crush a human skull, and has pierced the pelvis of a giant moa, and being able to dive at a speed of 50 miles per hour. That's basically the equivalent of dropping a concrete block from the top of an 8-story building. And the cause of the Haast eagle's extinction? Humans, more specifically the Maori. These Polynesian people have arrived in New Zealand sometime between 1250 to 1275. When they arrived, they hunted the moa for their meat and feathers, competing with the Haast Eagle for food, and cleared the forest to create land for agriculture, hunting, and easier travel, basically also destroying the habitats of the Haast Eagle. There have been some rumors that the eagles might have survived in the 1800s, but these are unconfirmed, and it is universally accepted that the Haast Eagle is basically went extinct in the 1400s. Now, before we talk about rewilding the Haast Eagle or even resurrecting them, there is a few things we need to talk about with the concept of resurrecting and rewilding the Haast Eagle. Like I have mentioned in my Rewilding the Ecological video, reintroducing large predators, especially apex predators, back into their native ecosystems can reestablish ecological relationships that have been lost and be able to help make the ecosystem much healthier. And considering that the Haast Eagle died out centuries ago rather than thousands of years or more so, that would mean that the ecology of the Haast Eagle is comparably unchanged from today to when it went extinct. I mean, yeah, there are habitats that are lost, but there are definitely still a lot of environments in New Zealand, especially in South Island New Zealand, where the Haast Eagle could be able to reign in. But in relation to that, and even in relation to the ecosystems, horses, blues, and in the background, is that there's one group of animals that the Haast Eagle will depend on, and its own resurrection can affect this group of animals as well. And that group of birds would be the 9 species of moa. They're still currently extinct, and I'm pretty certain, as many of you have heard earlier this month, there are talks about resurrecting the 9 different species of moa as well, and eventually reintroducing back to the wild whenever that happens. And we would need the eagle to help make certain that the moas don't overpopulate. However, even so, for example, we resurrect the Haast Eagle before the moa does, and we were able to successfully breed a large populations of Haast Eagles before we even resurrect the moa. This would definitely be an issue in the ecology of New Zealand, especially for the populations of the moa. But even if, hypothetically speaking, that we do resurrect the Haast Eagle long before we resurrect the moa, there is an ecological service that the eagles could help with us in the 21st century. For example, we resurrected them right now. Like its neighbor Australia, New Zealand has dealt with invasive species that humans introduced there, causing havoc to the environment. Many of them, of which do actually fit within the Haast Eagle's prey range. More details on this we will discuss later. So there are definitely pros and cons of being able to resurrect the Haast Eagle, but we will get to those later on in the video. Now let's start by resurrecting the eagle first. Now, obviously, the first thing to do for resurrecting the Haast Eagle is basically to find DNA. Now, since the Haast Eagle died out centuries ago, rather than thousands of years ago, this part should be pretty easy. In fact, we were able to find enough DNA to be able to find out what bird the Haast Eagle is closely related to. So, comparably speaking, this should be easy. So while mind you, they didn't have enough DNA for a resurrection, but it isn't a promising start. However, much like how it generally is in the extinction, you will not be able to get a full enough genome to purely resurrect a pure Haast Eagle. If anything, you need to modify the genome of a living relative with the extinct animals' DNA, especially the genes that differentiate between the two species. As I mentioned earlier, the Haast eagle's closest living relative is the little eagle of Australia, and its genome should be one that would be modified with the Haast eagle's genetic material to get something that is the closest thing to the extinct eagle. Now, when we get there, when we get this done, we can't just simply just clone a Haast eagle the same way we could with mammals. Like I mentioned in some of my previous videos, that with birds or any leg-laying animals like dinosaurs, even we can't be able to do cloning. Their reproductive physiology prevents this. So basically, best way to start is to be able to make embryonic chimeras that can be able to produce the sperm and eggs uh, of the Haast eagle, or at least of the modified Haast eagle. Now, we could be able to have the male bird be either a little eagle or even a rooster to be able to create the sperm. You would probably need to have an actual large species of eagle to produce the eggs of the Haast eagle. Now, mind you, because we have no idea just how big a Haast eagle's egg would be. We haven't found any fossils of it yet. So, and then if we go down this kind of route, we can use artificial insemination to inseminate the chimeric eagle with the sperm of the chimeric rooster or little eagle, and be able to go through it that way. Now, just in case if the Haast's eagle's eggs are bigger than that of some of the largest species of birds, eagles in the world, whether it's the harpy eagle or the Steller sea eagle, we could go through the same procedure that I mentioned on my Tyrannosaurus Rex video, my more recent one, to basically get the embryo from the egg and place them in a cup that is placed in an incubator. Like I mentioned before, this is something I talked about in a couple of my other videos. While we definitely don't know the incubation rate of the Haast eagle, I would say that it's probably somewhere between 30 to 7 days when we look at modern day eagles. Like the bald eagle's incubation rate, for example, can be between 34 to 36 days, and the Philippines eagle would be between 58 to 68 days. So we could make a fair assumption that the incubation rate would be within that range. But there could be a possibility the incubation rate may be longer, and the eagles could probably be more case selected than modern day eagles are. And after incubation is complete and the eaglet is hatched, we must work on raising it. Like extinct species of eagles, the Haast eagle would be born altricial, not precocial. Altricial birds hatch in a relatively undeveloped state, requiring extensive parental care for a period of time after hatching. They're unable to move around much, are able to feed themselves immediately, and rely on their parents for food, protection, and warmth. Although birds of prey, or known as raptors, no, not those raptors, are often called semi-altricial because while they will be blind at first, their eyes will open after a few hours, and they would be covered in a soft NATO down feathers. But regardless of which, when raising a little eaglet to become an adult eagle, and then eventually release them to the wild, it is essential that you make certain that the eaglet does not imprint on its human caretakers. Not only would this will make sure that the eagle sees itself as an eagle and not as a weird human and seek out humans for companionship or as a mate, but it will also not will not seek humans out for food. Issues with the reasons why would be discussed more on in this video. To avoid the eaglet from imprinting on the human caretakers and even help teach it some eagle etiquette, The caretakers that are responsible for the eaglet must raise it with a puppet. This sort of rearing has been done for other birds of prey, more famously with Californian condor. One tricky thing about the puppet is to make certain that the puppet looks like an adult Haast Eagle, and while this would be difficult, you could be able to make a good guess on what it would look like, looking at the eagle's genetics, its closest living relatives, and even some cave paintings and folklore of the Maori. Along with using hand puppets to rear the eaglets, the handlers would need to practice proper hygiene to avoid passing any sort of diseases or parasites to the chicks. This would include, but not limited to, sanitizing food stations and containers, avoiding rotten foods, sanitizing themselves when they come into contact with the eaglet, from washing hands to foot baths, and so forth. While we're on that, let's talk about food. Just like living eagles, the Haast eagle is a carnivore and should be fed as such. But you can't just give it muscle meat like a steak. You also need to give it organ meat, even have it with skin, even small bones. So that way they can be able to have all the vitamins and minerals that a chick will need in order to grow, especially calcium. On the initial feeding of the eaglets when they're born, you would need to have the meat cut into small enough pieces so that they could be able to swallow the food with ease. When they get older, they'll be able to start their own feeding skills quickly, and if they're like modern eagles, they'll be able to start pecking at the food themselves within a couple weeks. In around 5 or 6 weeks, at least what we know with modern eagles, the chicks will be able to feed themselves, and you could be able to start giving them larger pieces of meat. These and other things, which could be talked about in future videos, will be essential for raising Haast eagle chicks. Now let's get started on rewilding the eagle. Before we really get into rewilding the Haast eagle, however, there's a few things I need to be discussed that we did mention early on. Rewilding is not just the reintroduction of animals in their natural habitats, it's also the rejuvenation of an ecosystem. With the Haast eagle, there's a bit of a dilemma. Back in its day, the Haast eagle is the apex predator in New Zealand and primarily hunted the moa and the other birds that are native to the area. Now, as I mentioned before, all the 9 species of moas are basically extinct. And a significant number of the birds that they did hunted back then, like the kakapo and the takahe, are either extinct or very critically extinct. Well, the birds I mentioned are critically extinct, or critically endangered, but you get the idea. So with this, it would not be a good idea to introduce an apex predator into a broken ecosystem. If we're in this kind of scenario, before ever introducing the Haast eagle, if we're worried about a native species, better let the native herbivores, such as whether it's the living kakapo and takahe to potentially resurrected moa, have them be able to grow in number and establish themselves before reintroducing the Haast eagle. But that is if it's we're primarily dealing with native prey animals. However, there are there, there are introduced species that are present on New Zealand. They range from rats to deer that we humans brought over. While some of these would hinder the Haast eagle's success in the wild, there are species that would definitely benefit the eagle as prey. Now, we will get more in details about these effects and such later in the video. And so, let's get started with how to rewild the eagles. Prior to reintroducing the Haast eagle back to the wild, you must have a significant amount of them in captivity. The reasoning for this is to make certain that when the eagles get reintroduced in the wild, and if those individuals die, there will still be a significant amount of them in captivity, so that the surviving population of eagles in the world will not be in danger in case that happens. Along with having a large number of them, gotta make certain that the eagle's gene pool would need to be diverse as possible. Failing to do so would increase the chances of inbreeding depression and decrease the survivability of the species in the wild. Now, like I mentioned before you start choosing the individuals, you must also remember, like I mentioned before, that releasing apex predators into the wild would generally not be a good idea if the population of prey is not that adequate, or if the ecology is too broken to sustain a breeding population. That's why, in this case, if we basically resurrect the Haast Eagles before we resurrect the moas or even reintroduce them, or the populations of larger native birds like the kakahay are not in a good population number yet, that's why I propose that instead of introducing and breeding individuals, like breeding pairs and whatnot, to the wild, I would select individuals of a single gender, whether male or female. Probably female might work with some of the invasive species, but that's another story. I would say definitely do that so that we could be able to both not prevent premature breeding of the Haast Eagle, but also that we could be able to use them as a trial run, as forerunners, so that we could be able to get an idea at a steady pace of how we could be able to coexist with the Haast Eagle. We could study their movements and be able to get information so we can be ready for whenever we do start letting the eagles breed in captivity. But also introducing individuals, with non-breeding individual Haast eagles, breeding or not, to the wild could probably help with the invasive species, like with population controls and behavior control. But we'll get to that part later. So I recommend that in this scenario, I would definitely recommend introducing birds of a single gender before ever bringing breeding populations of them in the wild. This is actually based off of something that's been done for the Californian condor. Now, we didn't do this with the California condor exactly. Basically, like back in the 1980s, when the last California condors were taken to captivity, people wondered that if the environment is still good for the Californian condor. And since at that time only a population of like 20 some individuals were left, they were not willing to risk it. So instead, they introduced a group of female Andean condors that are native to South America to the wilds of California to be able to see if the environment is still good for the native condor. And it turns out that the environment is still good for the California condor. If it's good for the Andean condor, it's good for the California condor. And basically, those same birds were captured and brought back to their native habitat, and the process of both breeding and rewilding California condors went away. So with this in mind, it'd probably be a good way to start off with reintroducing the Haast Eagles. So with this in mind, you would definitely need to start selecting individuals, either whether the male or female, to see like which ones would be good to start with, especially when you have them just as one gender. When that happens and you select the individuals for rewilding, human contact will need to be as minimal as possible. This is so that the eagles won't imprint on humans, making certain that they will not be comfortable with humans and will not see humans as mates or as a source of food, in one way or the other. A good start would be one that's mentioned earlier in this video, is the usage of puppets. These puppets would help the eagles imprint on the image of their own species and see themselves as that image. They will seek others of the same image when companionship is desired, generally for reproductive purposes. This will also encourage the eagles to hunt for their own food and not seek humans to provide them with food, like how our pets would. Them seeking out humans for food would both will prevent them from executing their ecological role in the environment. It would also endanger people in both that the eagles would become aggressive and demand food from them, or even start seeing the people as food. Prior to releasing any eagles to the wild and to get the captive bird ready for the wild, the animals would need to be acclimatized to a natural life. The eagles are to be moved in large enclosures that mimic their natural environment, such like a forest or mountainous area, depending on where you're going to release them to. Most likely that this place will need to be built in the area where you plan to release the eagle. It would be preferable that it's a relatively remote area, remote enough that it's away from human contact, but relative enough so that people can be able to get in and out. At least the keepers. This enclosure should be designed to allow the eagles to build up their flight muscles and coordination, as well as to acclimatize them to the sights, sounds, and smells. Well, not so much for the bird, not much for the eagles, since they don't really have much sense of smell of their future habitats. Now, while the Haast Eagle is definitely larger than living eagles, using dimensions and considerations that we use with living eagles could be a help. I mean, the recommended minimum dimensions for the enclosure would be a minimum of 40 feet long, uh, 10 feet wide, and a minimum of 9 feet tall. But 10 to 15 is recommended for optimal flight behavior. In addition, these minimal dimensions, there are some sources that would suggest a minimum flight area of at least 300 square feet. But there are some important considerations to this. Species-specific needs that, well, meaning that while these are general guidelines for living eagles, there are special requirements might differ between the Haast eagles and individual needs. Consulting with a raptor expert or a wildlife agency is crucial to determining the best enclosure design for a particular situation, as well as proper observation in case any changes are need to be made. But also, beyond size, the aviary should have features like varying purchasing heights, natural materials like branches and logs, even opportunities to capture live prey to promote the eagle's physical and mental well-being, and even help them be able to learn how to hunt. Also, it will need to be built with strong, durable material like heavy gauge wire mesh to prevent escapes and to protect the eagles from predators. Well, there's not much predators in New Zealand, but there are at least some invasive predators. We'll get to this later. It should be designed to withstand weather conditions and be easy to clean and maintain. Now, things might be different when you're dealing with a genetically modified eagle, but there could be a legality issue with this sort of thing with the Haast eagle. I mean, it would depend like how federal and state regulations would be done in involvement with the Haast eagle, who in this case is basically a genetically modified bird, but it would definitely be consideration, especially if you need like permits and inspections to ensure humane and healthy conditions. Also, you got to consider the ethical considerations that the well-being and the welfare of the individual eagles should be a priority when designing and constructing the aviary in question. As mentioned multiple times in this video, efforts must be made to reduce human habituation by minimizing human presence and using disguises when necessary. Also, while it is important to feed them, especially by providing carcasses, they will need to learn how to hunt, and that would mean that live prey will need to be brought into the enclosure so they can learn so. This would mean that we both need to start with the individuals of the species that would be prey for them, whether it's like the brush-tailed possums and or young deer, and that modifications of the eagle's enclosure would probably need to be done so that the eagle could be able to dive in on its prey properly. The process mentioned earlier and after this part is basically using a technique called hacking. Hacking is a falconry method used for young birds in a controlled way to raise and release eagles and other birds of prey into the wild, viable environments from an artificial nesting tower. This method is used to stimulate a wild eagle's nesting site and aids in recovery in an area where repopulation is desirable. The young birds would need to be placed in an artificial nest site or the hack box and be fed without imprinting on humans, especially being fed on prey that you want them to hunt when able to, as mentioned earlier. And at this, their birds will gradually learn how to fly and acquire hunting skills with the food provided until they become self-sufficient, as mentioned earlier. When they start to show self-sufficiency, that's when the cage door will need to be left open and allow the eagle to leave on its own. It will be timid and will stay close to the hacking area for a while, but then the eagle will eventually become self-sufficient that it will leave the area altogether and search out for a territory. Of course, to keep an eye on it, a transmitter will need to be placed on it so that we could be able to track the eagle's movements and make certain that it doesn't get into trouble. Now, like I mentioned, the Haast Eagle is basically the apex predator in New Zealand. And when reintroducing an apex predator back to an ecology, it could definitely have a lot of effects. But, like I mentioned earlier, the Haast Eagle situation will be very unique. Since if we resurrect the Haast Eagle before the MOA, it would definitely cause trouble. And that's why, like I mentioned earlier in the video, that until we resurrect the MOA, and in the case that we do resurrect the eagle first and not the MOA, but until we resurrect the MOA, breed them, and make sure there's enough of them to sustain a breeding population of Haast eagles, we will do just basically individuals of the same gender and no breeding populations, at least not yet. Now, with this, the individual eagle's presence on New Zealand can definitely have some effects on the ecology, but probably not as much at the moment as one would think, and probably like more local and localized areas since we're not allowing the eagles to breed in this kind of situation. They will have a very limited sort of thing going on when it comes to ecology, but they could definitely still have a big effect, especially when it involves the non-native species, and having the eagles out there hunting could definitely be a justification of releasing them to go after these non-native species. And there's a whole different variety of non-native species that are in New Zealand that would be affected by the eagle, or they would affect the eagle themselves. Now, I'm going to go through a list of different invasive species that are in New Zealand, but I won't be able to cover all of them since there are definitely a lot amount of them that won't be affected by the eagle or not even have anything to do with them at all. But I will cover the eagles that would definitely have an effect to or from the Haast eagle. So let's get started. The first species we will start with is the Aussie native, the brush-tailed possum. Introduced into New Zealand in the 1830s for the fur trade, they've caused destruction to the ecology via consuming plants, basically destroying forests, competing with native species for food. They will also consume the eggs and chicks of native birds, and are even known to be vectors of bovine TB. The average weight of a brush-tailed possum in New Zealand would typically range between 2.6 to almost 9 pounds. So while they would be in the small end for the eagles, they would definitely be doable as prey, especially for the smaller males, since an eagle's females are larger than the males, and for young eagles. So they could still be a good source of food for eagles, if not as a snack. The eagle's predation would help with their populations and would in fact actually make them more nocturnal, since it's believed that the eagles were diurnal, since a lot of the large birds of New Zealand, like the flightless parrot, the kakapo, are nocturnal because of that. And to make it easier, we can assume that because of this, almost every single potential prey of the Haast Eagle will probably develop more nocturnal habits in order to avoid predation from the eagles. Oh, on an interesting note, the the brush-tailed possum in New Zealand is actually probably said to be the most common roadkill in the roads of the country. So if the Haast Eagle is anything like modern day eagles and that they'll be opportunistic, I would definitely say they would definitely more than likely go at these roadkills. And along with being food, there will be a little bit of an irony too. Like I mentioned earlier, they will also go after birds' eggs. So it would definitely be possible that if given the chance, the brush-tailed possum would go after the eggs of the Haast Eagle whenever the opportunity presents itself. Feral rabbits, who were first introduced in the 1830s, and the European hares, first introduced in 1851, are both bad for the environment, but the rabbit is more so than the hare. While the hare does cause harm via consumption of vegetation, the rabbit is more destructive with their high reproductive rates, and their grazing would reduce vegetation cover, lead to increased soil erosion, and they will also compete with both wildlife and livestock for food. With rabbits on average weighing around 3.3 pounds, and the hares would weigh up to 11 pounds, they would definitely be considered the smaller form of food for the Haast eagles. Younger males and younger eagles would definitely make a meal out of them, more so with the hare than the rabbits due to the larger size. And while it could be slim, there might be a chance that these herbivores will cause a population explosion of a breeding population of the Haast eagles, much like how rabbits did in Australia for the wedge-tailed eagles. Three species of wallabies have been introduced to the islands of New Zealand. The primary wallaby species that is on the South Island is the Bennett's or redneck wallaby. The other two species are the Darmar and Parmar wallabies that are present only on the North Island. Introduced in the 1800s for private zoos and hunting, the wallaby became a destructive pest with its grazing, which made it compete with livestock, destroyed crops, killed young trees, and changed the native plant community. Weighing between 24 to 59 pounds on average, the wallabies would definitely be considered as a little bit more adequate sized prey for the eagles than the previously mentioned species. The tricky thing is that their jumping behavior would make them difficult prey for the eagles, but it is definitely within the realms of possibility that the eagles would be able to make a meal out of the wallabies. And of course, wherever humans go, rats would follow. Currently on New Zealand, there are three species of rats that have been introduced to South Island. The ones that were off that the ones that came with European settlers would be the brown rat and the black rat. But the third one came much earlier. The Kiori, or the Polynesian rat, came with the Maui in the 1200s, whereas the other two species of rats mentioned earlier came in with the Europeans in the latter 1700s. While each species had varying degrees of destruction to the New Zealand ecology, these three species of rats destroyed it by hunting native species, from insects to birds, destroyed native plants, went after birds' eggs, and competed with the native animals for their food. While they would be considered pretty small for the Haast eagles, there could be times where a young eagle or a young male would feast on a brown rat, since this species is the largest of the three. Occasionally, there is a threat of them consuming the eagle's eggs, much like the possums. Well, if they could be able to get an opportunity for this. This and the possums' possibility of them eating eggs as well would definitely need to be considered if you're going to bring breeding populations into the mix. Just like how rats came with humans, pets came with them as well. And in this case, cats and dogs. The Maori brought dogs with them in around the 1200s, whereas while the Europeans also brought their own dogs, they the the Europeans also brought cats along with them as well. Both are destructive predators to the native bird populations. Feral cats are more commonplace on that sort of department than that of feral dogs, at least on South Island. The North Island is more known to having problem with feral dogs, at least packs of them. And it's not that noticeable on the South Island. Some sightings, but not much else. However, dogs would actually be an interesting candidate for being not only within the weight not only within the weight that makes them potential prey for eagles, but they also will be a competitive threat to them as well. When an eagle makes a kill of an animal that is too large for it to carry it away, it would feast right where its prey died and will remain by its kill for several days. This will make it vulnerable to dog attacks, especially if the dog either wants to kill or wants to kill the eagle. Being the only apex predator before humans, it would definitely be an issue for eagles. So this will definitely be something to consider. With the average weight of feral cats in New Zealand being around 8.27 pounds, but there are some individuals that are do weigh up 15 pounds. Like the possums, they would be on the smaller end as prey for the eagles, and they would definitely be hunted by the eagles. But there is a small possibility that they would go after eagle chicks, though this would be rare. But there'll definitely be a competition with smaller birds and smaller prey with the eagles. So there is that. Ferrets, weasels, and stoats, all of which are muscelids, were introduced to New Zealand in the 1880s to control the rabbit populations. Unfortunately, while the hunted rabbits, they actually prefer to go after the local fauna, especially the flightless birds. And they became so destructive that they wiped out whole bird populations and either completely killed off whole species, like the laughing owl, or almost wiped them out completely, with some remnants still surviving on islands, like the kakapo. While it would be possible that the eagles would hunt one of these small mammals every now and then, very seldomly, but it's most likely that the muscelids won't attack the eagles, although chicks would definitely be vulnerable to these mammals if the eagles nest on the ground, and stoats have been known to go after smaller young eagles when the opportunity arises. First arriving in New Zealand in 1769, feral pigs are immensely destructive to the New Zealand ecology. They've been known to root through the soil in search of food, which will destroy native vegetation, damage plant roots, and uproot seedlings. Their feeding habits and wallowing can alter soil composition and increase erosion and promote the spread of invasive weeds. They can also compete with native animals for sources of food and prey on vulnerable species like birds, reptiles, and invertebrates. They can also carry diseases and parasites that can affect both native wildlife and livestock. While the feral pigs in New Zealand would vary in weight, they would on average, like the boars would weigh between 91 to 133 pounds, while the females or sows would weigh between 64 to 90 pounds. The heaviest pig on record that's been found there in a study weighed around 326 pounds. And feral pigs are found in many national parks in South Island, especially in the northern part of Abel Tasman National Park. With the feral pigs being definitely within the size range to be the prey of the Haast Eagle and their fast reproductive rate, they would definitely be a great source of food for the Haast Eagle. However, there is one unexpected side effect that would negatively affect the native prey species. With the pigs providing so a large amount of food, it would encourage a population explosion of the eagles, provided that they are allowed to breed in the wild in the beginning. And this would increase the predation rates of the native prey species, and this would not be favorable, especially for the prey species that are between threatened and critically endangered. This is known as hyperpredation. This sort of thing happened on the Channel Islands off the coast of Southern California, where the presence of feral pigs both lured in and increased the populations of golden eagles, and the presence of abundance of these eagles caused a serious decline on the population of the Channel Island foxes. Introduced to New Zealand in 1773 by Captain James Cook's second voyage, feral are immensely destructive due to their overgrazing and trampling of vegetation, which leads to soil erosion and habitat loss, with the potential to spread weeds and disease. Populations would vary in density, with higher concentrations in areas like Marlborough. With the weight of goats being between 60 to 150 pounds, they would definitely be within the prey range of the Haast Eagle and would make a good meal for these birds of prey. Sheep were first introduced to New Zealand between 1773 and 1777. These first introductions didn't establish feral populations. Later introductions eventually did. Much like goats, sheep will overgraze the landscape, decreasing biodiversity and increasing soil erosion. Weighing between 100 to 175 pounds, feral sheep would make an adequate prey for the Haast Eagle. However, this would condition them to go after farm sheep, leading to issues with farmers later on. Pinpointing the exact date of the first introduction of feral cow to the South Island of New Zealand is difficult, but various sources do suggest that they were introduced by the late 18th and early 20th centuries. There have been populations of feral cattle in various parts of the South Island, but many have been removed by the latter 1980s or early 1990s. But there is a population of feral cattle that are still roaming behind Lake Burner. The terrain of the location makes rounding them up next to impossible. While it would be difficult to pin down the average weight for feral cattle in the South Island, it's reasonable to assume that they would weigh in between 990 to 1,320 pounds. This will make cattle heavier than anything the Haast Eagle has ever hunted before, probably over twice as much, or more so. While the Haast Eagle have the power to take on large prey, it will be most likely that the eagles will go after young, from individuals that are between 10 and 15 months old and younger, since 10 and 15 months old cattle would be around the same weight as the giant moa, or go after sick or injured individuals. Much like with the feral sheep, feral cattle would be like a gateway prey item towards livestock. And this would definitely be bad, considering that dairy farm is a big business in New Zealand, as well as also for beef cattle as well. It's not just non-native mammals that were introduced to New Zealand that would feed the Haast Eagle. There are also some non-native birds that were introduced there as well, and one of them would be feral turkeys. Likely introduced in the mid-1800s, these feral turkeys would weigh between 7 to 23 pounds. While on the smaller scale as prey for the eagle, they are still considerably decent small prey for the eagle, and within the realms of possibilities of them being hunted by the eagles. While they're definitely not considered as destructive as earlier mentioned species, they can cause a small degree of damage, such as some agricultural damage like crops and competing with native wildlife. As well as turkeys, geese and swans have also been introduced to New Zealand and are pretty big themselves, invasive, and they can be considered as potential prey items for a resurrected Haast Eagle. Introduced in 1905, the Canadian goose was brought into New Zealand for sport hunting, and were even under protection with the wildlife services in New Zealand until 2011. Canadian geese are destructive to New Zealand. The impacts of their activities would include pasture damage, crop damage, contamination via their fecal matter, and habitat destruction. Weighing in between 9.9 to 12.1 pounds, they would definitely be on the smaller end as prey. You're seeing a trend here? But they would make a decent meal. More like a snack than a meal, but they would still be a potential prey. Starting in 1866, mute swans were introduced to New Zealand as ornamental birds. While these swans are definitely not as destructive or invasive on New Zealand as they are in North America, they can still pose some risks, such as competition with native waterfowl, destruction of water plants, and spreading diseases to native birds. Weighing on average between 17.6 to 33 pounds, they would be on the smaller end of prey size, but they're at least larger than Canadian geese. Going back to mammals, there are more hoofed animals that would definitely be great prey for the Haast Eagle, and the chamois, a species of goat antelope, is one of them. It was actually introduced to New Zealand in 1907 as a gift from the Emperor of Austria and are now popularly hunted today. Weighing on average between 55 and 132 pounds, they are definitely within the size range as prey for the Haast Eagle, and there are definitely evidence in both in fossils and Maori folklore that mountain ranges are one of the habitats that these giant eagles did live on. So with this, it would definitely work out well for the eagles. This will definitely help out since, like the other ungulates, the chamois grazing is pretty destructive to the ecology, from causing soil erosion to preventing forest regeneration. Another mountain-dwelling ungulate that was introduced there is the Himalayan tahr. Introduced in 1904, the tahr was introduced to New Zealand for recreational hunting, and just like with the other ungulates, they have caused issues like overgrazing, soil erosion, and habitat destruction. Weighing between 80 to 300 pounds, they're definitely an adequate prey option for the eagle. Just like with how the chamois, the habitat is doable for the eagles as well. Out of all the invasive ungulates introduced to New Zealand, deer are the most widespread and successful in the invasive ungulates there, and would definitely be a primary source of food for the eagles. At least invasive food, anyway. Like all ungulates, the deer's grazing and browsing habits have caused overgrazing, competition with native fauna, destruction of forests, and increased soil erosion. When hunting them, the eagles will have to worry about not just their hooves when they buck, but also the antlers of the male deer will definitely be a danger to the birds as well. First species in question is the white-tailed deer. They were introduced to South Island of New Zealand, primarily on Stewart Island and Reese Valley, in 1905 as a gift from U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. Weighing between 88 to 110 pounds, they would definitely be within the range of as the eagle's adequate prey. Fallow deer were introduced to New Zealand In 1864, they were introduced there primarily for recreational hunting. With them weighing in between 132 to 220 pounds, they would definitely make a great prey for the eagles. Introduced to the South Island of New Zealand, primarily Fiordland in 1909, the American elk or wapiti were also a gift from Theodore Roosevelt as well, along with white-tailed deer. Weighing in between 440 to 990 pounds, the elk or wapiti are definitely large enough to be prey for the eagle, but they are also within the size that they might be a little too big for the eagles at a certain weight. With this, it would be plausible that the eagles would go after young, sick, or injured individuals more often, but would go after larger individuals if circumstances work well on that. First introduced to New Zealand in 1851, the red deer is the most successful of the deer species throughout both islands. Weighing between 190 to 550 pounds, the red deer is definitely within the weight range as potential prey for the Haast Eagle, though it would need to watch out for the antlers of the males and larger individuals. And for the final deer species that has been introduced on South Island of New Zealand is definitely a peculiar one. Most people don't even know this at all. Though there's definitely been documentation that this animal has been introduced here, but it was thought to be extinct quite some time ago. But now people think it's still out there, and if it is, it will definitely present a unique challenge for the Haast Eagle, and that would be the Fiordland moose. First introduced in 1900 and more successfully introduced in 1910, the moose was introduced as a potential game animal for recreational hunting. While the population of moose was growing at first, populations dropped drastically as the red deer populations grew and outcompeted the moose when it comes to food, and the moose was thought to be extinct by 1952. However, sightings and one expert's research has brought some thoughts that some moose might still be out there, but it's not completely confirmed. It's basically have become like the New Zealand Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster. If the Fiordland moose is still around, it would definitely be a worthy adversary or worthy prey for the Haast Eagle, especially since moose could weigh between 441 to 1,600 pounds. But with this size, it would be most likely that, for the most part, that the eagle will go after young, sick, or old moose more often. But there could be times they might go after larger individuals if the opportunity presents itself and if they are still around. There are three other species of deer that were introduced to New Zealand: the sambar, sika, and rusa deer, but these are only found on the North Island, so they would not be able to be hunted by eagles. But if these deer ever appear on South Island, or that Haast eagles were ever introduced to the North Island, they will definitely become a suitable prey for the Haast eagle. While an eagle could be able to take on some horses, primarily young, old, or sick ones, there are no feral horses in the South Island. They're only found in the North Island. But there are domesticated farm horses in the South Island, and those can definitely be a potential prey source for the Haast eagle. Like I said, with the reintroduction of the Haast eagle, it could definitely rekindle the old ecological roles, and it will definitely help with invasive species. However, like I mentioned when I talked about the pigs, hunting these invasive species could cause the eagles to have a population explosion. So, So that's why you can't be reckless about it. And if we do resurrect the Haast Eagle before we resurrect the moa, or before the some of the other larger birds that are still around are not in large numbers yet, best to book have non-breeding individuals out first as basically forerunners. And I can imagine that even if we do this, it could help with the ecology a bit, since that the presence of these eagles won't just help control their numbers, but it will also even help control the, the prey's behavior. Not just from having more nocturnal habits, like I mentioned before, but also keep them from congregating on riparian areas that often. Since waterways such as rivers, lakes, ponds are very popular places for predators to hunt prey because everything needs to get to drink water eventually. Basically, at this point, it would pretty much encourage the prey to just drink at the water and get out of there because an eagle could be hunting them. And not just a Haast eagle, but other predators do that too, like big cats, wolves in Yellowstone, and so forth. So I can imagine this sort of thing would definitely happen when the Haast eagle has been resurrected and allowed to fly free. Of course, with an apex predator like the Haast eagle, you have to be pretty naive to not consider that there will definitely be conflicts between humans and the eagle, immensely so. This will definitely be a unique situation for two reasons. One would be that most civilizations, other than the Maori, have never had to deal with an eagle of this caliber. While farmers and other people have had problems with eagles, whether it's dealing with livestock losses to extremely rare child attacks, it was never with an eagle that is specifically adapted for hunting large prey, especially prey that are as large as humans. The second would be that New Zealand is one of the few places in the world that is pretty safe, at least when it comes to dealing with animals. It has no venomous animals, no large land predators plaguing the populace, and so forth. Reintroducing not only a large apex predator, but an unusual one back to the, the landscape would need a lot of negotiations, planning, infrastructure, reassurances, and contingencies to make coexistence between humans and the eagles possible. The best way to start with when reintroducing the eagles, whether it's the same gendered individuals or trying to establish breeding populations, is to start by reintroducing them into the most remote areas that they will be able to adapt to and live for a bit without initially getting into trouble with people. But also make certain that these remote areas do have a significant amount of prey. But with them being able to fly and spread out faster than land predators, conflicts between the species will be inevitable. No doubt that one of the first conflicts that eagles will have with humans is hunting livestock. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, hunting some of the feral animals like sheep and cattle would definitely become gateways for them to go after starting hunting livestock. And even the eagles hunting deer would definitely make them a pest to venison farms, which New Zealand is well known for. Well, even though the Haast eagle is something that Western civilization never dealt with before, hopefully what we know from dealing with living eagles today, especially for farmers dealing with like golden eagles going after sheep and whatnot, well, some of them would probably give us some ideas. One would be that you'll use mesh or netting over the top of outdoor enclosures or pens if possible to be able to keep the eagles from diving in. Adding a solid roof can add an extra layer of protection, further minimizing a risk for attacks from above. Um, Eagles are less likely to attack livestock around buildings or within smaller pens, basically like 1-2 acres or zero point 0.5 to 1 hectare, how you pronounce it. And according to the extension program, fences alone that obviously will not deter eagles, but keeping animals in covered pens or shelters would significantly reduce the risk of them going after livestock. Always make sure you create or provide access to sheltered areas like sheds, brushy or wooded areas, basically so that livestock can be able to seek cover from aerial attacks. Livestock guardian animals, primarily livestock guardian dogs like Great Pyrenees, are known to be able to have protective instincts and could help be able to deter or confront aerial predators like the Haast Eagle. Mind you, it would take a couple years for such dogs to be fully mature and be trained to be livestock guardians. Also, the Haast Eagle is pretty big and would take on an animal as big as a Great Pyrenees or an Anatolian Shepherd, or basically like dogs, but become a source of can become prey, like I mentioned earlier in the video. So this is 50-50. And there are also some deterrents that could be used to help keep eagles away. Ah, one of the deterrents that could be used is basically visual deterrents. Pretty much like shiny objects like aluminum foil strips, CD players, right, or reflective tape. Or at least in the case of or at least in the case of the Haast Eagle, something big like maybe some sheet metal that's very reflective, or solar panels. Solar panels are known to be able to deter birds because of reflections. So, and since eagles have very sharp vision, reflective large reflective objects like this, especially like on shelters, perimeter fences, and such, would help be able to deter the eagles significantly. It's not 100%, but it's definitely something to consider. And another would be, weirdly enough, scarecrows. Strategically placed scarecrows, especially on like high ridges or points where livestock rest, can deter eagles. However, it's crucial to move them around frequently so the eagles can't will not be so accustomed to them if they're moving around. They're moved around every now and then. The eagle will think that it's a real creature and stay away. And then there is also motion activated devices. Motion activated devices that could be able to emit high frequency sounds that eagles can hear, or produce flashing lights, or even laser lights, which has been done for deterring birds off of crops, and could even do the same thing for birds of prey too. So I would definitely recommend getting something like that so they can help deter the eagles from going after livestock. The device that I speak is pretty much like this. You set it up on top of where your livestock would graze and whatnot, where they're vulnerable, and whenever an eagle comes swooping down, it will set up a big flashing light or noise to deter the bird. Other ways you could be able to help prevent eagles from going after livestock and such is basically get rid of anywhere where they can roost, like trim trees, shrubs, livestock enclosures to remove any potential perching and roosting spots for the eagles. Install physical barriers like bird spikes and or netting that can be installed eh, explain, to deter eagles from roosting or perching close to livestock enclosures. But there's also you could just supervise the livestock. When livestock are outdoors, your presence can act like a deterrent to the eagles. You can train your livestock to seek shelter or cover whenever they detect a threat from above, potentially using social cues or visual signals to help reinforce this behavior. Removing the carcasses of dead animals out of the area, especially when areas where your livestock graze, your livestock give birth, definitely want to remove the carcass, either moving it far away or burying the carcass completely. When conflicts with farmers do occur, There must be a compensation system to help farmers that lost their livestock to the birds, much like how it's been done with wolves in Yellowstone. Also, make certain that there is an effective removal, either removing the birds to a different location, or take them back into captivity, or take them into captivity by officials when the need arises. However, while this is all well and good, there is one concern that people would definitely have a greater priority for, and that is the potential of the eagles hunting humans. With them being large and adapted to hunt large prey, there is no doubt that the Haast Eagle is capable of hunting humans. This might be a rare phenomenon when non-human prey is abundant. It could happen, but it could happen if food is scarce or there is that one individual that is curious about it. There's also the possibility of if humans have hand-fed the eagle, it would definitely not only seek humans for food, but it would eventually start seeing humans as a source of food. Best way to prevent an eagle attack is to be in a group. Best to travel at night, to have either like a laser pointer like this, or have like a signal mirror in case you need to defend yourself. However, with the laser or the mirror, you must only use it if the eagle is attacking you. Other ways you can defend yourself or to scare off the eagle is, well, make loud noises and or use an umbrella. I'm not joking. Like you use the umbrella as like a shield, but also like a noise slash movement maker. Now, eagles attacking humans will not always be about food. It can also mean that the eagle's either defending its kill or defending its nest. But if it's attacking you, like to eat you, make sure you gotta stay calm, assess the situation, and get out of the area. Best thing to do is to get inside and call the authorities, especially those working with wildlife. If any eagle shows a preference to hunt humans, that eagle is either to have to be put into captivity or shot on sight. There's no way going around it. As you can see, there is definitely a lot to consider with the idea of rewilding the Haast Eagle. But if it was done properly and correctly, with ecology, behavior, and many other attributes in mind, I definitely have no doubt that rewilding the Haast Eagle will be one of the best things to be done for New Zealand's wilderness. If Hey there, guys! If you made it this far, thank you ever so kindly. Ever since I first heard about the Haast Eagle in documentaries, I've always been fascinated by this bird, and I've always wondered what it would be like if the bird was resurrected and was reintroduced back in New Zealand, especially after I've heard about several of the species that were introduced to New Zealand, like the Fiordland moose. That definitely was an interesting little deal in history. This video has been sponsored by David Glean. He wanted to be able to do something for July, which is basically like the month of the eagle, which basically means like the Fourth of July. No surprise. What a coincidence. So thank you, David Glean, for your sponsorship. I want to say thank you to artists Keenan Taylor, Sagesprig, artbyjrc, and Cether888 for them either making illustrations for my video or allowing me permission to be able to use some of their illustrations for my video. I will send you links to their pages and such down below to give them a good appreciation and whatnot. Also, I thank you to my patrons, both paid and unpaid. If you'd like to be able to support videos like this, please be a paid patron on Patreon and going from there. Also, I want to say thanks to subscribers and viewers like you. Thank you. Now, if you haven't already, hit that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you like the videos like this, I sincerely hope that each and every one of you has a grand day. Adios.